Post Live, I'm Caroline Modaresi-Tehrani. On Sunday, GOP presidential candidate and neurosurgeon Ben Carson was asked about whether he would support a Muslim in the White House.
So do you believe that Islam is consistent with the Constitution?
No, I don't. I do not. I would not advocate that we put a Muslim in charge of this nation. I absolutely would not agree with that.
Well, at an event this morning in Sharonville, Ohio, Carson was asked again about his comments surrounding Muslims. Take a listen to this.
Well, it has nothing to do with being a Muslim. That was the question that was specifically asked. If the question had been asked about a Christian, and they had said, you know, would you support a Christian who believes in establishing a theocracy? I would have said no. And then some people would say, he's against Christians. No. You have to be able to look at the context in which I'm saying.
Well, he's not the only Republican running to be president who's made some dubious comments about Islam. So what does this say about how Muslims are viewed by the Republican conservative base? And does the GOP have a Muslim problem? Well, joining me now are Haris Safar, national spokesperson for the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community USA, Saba Ahmed, a Republican Islamic lobbyist, David Friedlander, contributing writer for The Daily Beast, and we're going to be joined shortly by Nezar Hamzi, Florida Executive Director for the Council on American Islamic Relations. So thank you all very much for joining me. And Haris, I'll start with you. So what was the first thing that crossed your mind when you heard Ben Carson's initial comments?
Well, my initial reaction was actually surprised because to this point, I've actually had a pretty positive view of Dr. Carson. He seems very methodical, calm and collected, very intelligent. But clearly he said something that was not exuding intelligence. You know, his views are not fact-based, and they promote this fear and misunderstanding of Islam and Muslims, which is why, you know, at least I'm sure many Muslims would join me, but, you know, at least within the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, we invite Dr. Carson to a dialogue to learn more about the true Islam and about American Muslims by going to the source, go to the Quran and understand how we've been part of the fabric of this society for about a century. And that's what he has lost in asking us to take a special oath of allegiance that is not applicable to anyone else.
Yeah, you know, what was for you the most challenging or the most problematic part of what Ben Carson's been saying over the last couple of days?
Well, it may actually have come this morning when he was seeking to clarify his statements, when he said, hey, it goes across the board. Just like any Christian, if any Christian said he wants to establish a theocracy, I wouldn't support that. But that's not what he said about Muslims. He said, I wouldn't support any Muslim. So is he conflating a Muslim as somebody who wants to establish a theocracy? And so it just seemed like an entirely unjust and unfair way of looking at Islam. And I understand he's a religious man, as maybe it's, you know, part of the lower human nature of competing for religious rights, you know, which religion's better. But if you're going to be a leader is one who stands for truth, for righteousness, fair dealing, and justice for all people, regardless of whether or not they agree with your faith.
Yeah, and also, you know, we do live in a country, of course, where faith and politics are supposed to be divisive. I've got a comment here from Harlem Knight 404 who says, people who create and enforce laws should only consider the law while interacting with the public. There should never, ever be any other consideration. This includes Christians, Jews, Muslims, and everyone who obey a higher power. Saba, I want to bring you into the conversation. You know, would you identify as a Republican?
Yes, I'm a registered Republican in Washington, D.C.
And you also identify as a Muslim, correct?
Yes, of course.
So in terms of your, you know, from where you were sitting when you heard Ben Carson making these comments, what were the thoughts that were running through your mind?
Well, I was actually very sad to hear his comments. I recently met Ben Carson here in Washington a couple months ago, and we had a conversation, and I could tell by that time he was leaning towards, he's being advised by some very anti-Islamic folks, Frank Gaffney in particular, that he mentioned. I mean, his stance on Islam in general has been very absurd, and obviously we don't want a presidential candidate to have such views. It's we were, as a Muslim American who's serving in the U.S. government, I feel it's not fair to a lot of us who are in public office and who are, there are thousands of Muslim Americans serving in the U.S. military, Congress, and government positions. It is not fair to target all of us and tell us that for some reason we're eligible for everything else but the presidency.
Yeah, in terms of obviously you said you met him, and Harris actually said at the start of this conversation that he seems like an intelligent man. He's certainly been making some statements that I think many would question his intelligence and his integrity as well, given that this is a man who wants to be running the country. What do you think that he would need to do right now to get your, not necessarily support, but just to get you back on board and reconsider what you think about him?
I think he needs to apologize for his comments and, condemn the hateful bigotry. He needs to distinguish. I mean, we're all concerned about radicalism or extremism, and we're all concerned about terrorism. Islam strongly condemns all forms of terrorism. I mean, he needs to distinguish that, there are good and bad people everywhere. By targeting peaceful Muslims, he's just creating a big firestorm, and there's 1.6 billion plus Muslims. He can't align all Muslims as somehow, associated with terrorism. We have, we need to be very strong, and especially as a presidential candidate, he needs to know the basics of Islam so that he can deal with the Islamic world. We have so many huge issues going on in the world today, and during these challenging times, we need good leadership who can, not divisive politics. We need strong leadership who understands the religion and can bring peace to the world.
And I think you're absolutely right to sort of hit on this point of leadership. It's actually something the New York Times raised in a piece yesterday by Jonathan Martin. Without calming voices, GOP is letting divisive ones speak on Muslims. So the thrust of Jonathan Martin's argument is that without a strong, unifying leader, you have these, some would say initially fringe voices. Now it seems to be speaking for the majority of the Republican base, weighing in, the likes of Donald Trump being one of them as well. Donald Trump also got into hot water last week. And on Meet the Press, Trump essentially doubled down.
Well, I feel strongly the Muslims are excellent. I know so many Muslims that are such fabulous people, but there is a problem. I mean, there is no question about it. And, we can be politically correct and we can say there is no problem whatsoever. But the fact is there is a problem with some, and it's a very severe problem, and it's a problem that's taking place all over the world. But I have such great respect and love for so many of the people. I mean, they are great people.
Can you imagine supporting or being comfortable if a Muslim ever became president of the United States?
I can say that, it's something that at some point could happen. We'll see. I mean, it's something that could happen. Would I be comfortable? I don't know if we have to address it right now, but I think it is certainly something that could happen.
You said you'd had no problem putting a Muslim in your cabinet.
Some people have said it already happened.
Let's contrast that with John McCain back in 2008.
I can't trust Obama. I have read about him, and he's an Arab. He is not.
No, ma'am. He's a decent family man, citizen that I just happen to have disagreements with on fundamental issues, and that's what this campaign is all about. He's not. Thank you.
David, let's talk a little bit about the difference in handling that kind of situation.
Well, I mean, I think you see the difference between a skilled politician and someone who is, on the one hand, an entertainer in the case of Trump, and another who is sort of new on the political stage, like Ben Carson. I mean, the proper response clearly in both of these questions is to reject the premise and to say that, Muslims are welcome in this country and Muslims are good family people too, and to sort of, reject the premise of the question. Neither of them did that. And both Carson and Trump have sort of been playing in these waters, I think, for long enough.
Yeah, the fascinating thing is that when they are not actually doing what John McCain did, which is absolutely, as you said, just rejecting the premise of the question, they're doing so because they state that they don't want to be politically correct. They say things that people are thinking, but no one wants to say because of the PC police. Actually, Jeet here, I think, very accurately sort of pointed this out on Twitter, and he said politically correct is deployed by Carson and virtually everyone else. Just means ideas I don't like, but won't argue with in detail. Harris, what do you think about that?
I mean, that's a very astute observation. Many people are hiding behind the guise of, "Oh, I'm courageous and I'm not going to be politically correct." But this is not a game about who can say the most profound thing and aggressive thing under the guise of free speech. Like was mentioned before, leadership matters. And what we saw with Mr. McCain was, you're right, like a skilled politician, but he exuded, in that opportunity, he took the leadership role of saying, no, I want to be leader of this entire country, and that means I'm going to be leader of everyone, including Muslims. But this is what we're failing to see in this round of presidential elections, at least amongst some of the candidates on the GOP side. And so when we say we don't want to be politically correct, that's fine. But what seems troubling is every time somebody says that, what follows is a pretty derogatory comment or a comment that would breed fear and mistrust either of Islam or of Muslims or Sharia, even though they clearly have no idea what Sharia even is.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about Sharia, because there are lots of people in our comments, Phyllis Burgess being one of them, who says, why is it that Sharia law is emphasized in Muslim communities in the US? Do you agree with that?
It is, absolutely. Now, I understand why. The word Sharia has become the new boogeyman term when it comes to Arabs or anything that's foreign. Now, there are punishments that are misrepresented by extremists and very hard-line governments like Saudi Arabia and Afghanistan and Pakistan and Sudan. But ultimately, Sharia is not something that's defined by a country. It's something that's defined by a religion. And the religion says that the law of the land prevails. So it doesn't really matter. You're required, as part of being a Muslim, to take an oath of allegiance to the country in which you reside. And that suffices for everyone, regardless of their faith.
Yeah, Saba, do you agree with that? Do you think that there has been an emphasis on Sharia within communities across the United States?
I agree, but then Sharia law is only like a set of rules. I mean, Sharia is just the way we live our lives, the way we practice our religion. I mean, Sharia includes the way we pray every day. There's millions of Muslim Americans here in America who are already living according to the Sharia. So I don't think it's fair to, the way it's interpreted differently by every country is, we can't let the governments define religion. The way Saudi Arabia defines Sharia is different than the way Turkey defines it, or the way Indonesia defines it. I don't think it's fair to, bring in laws from other countries. And I mean, Sharia is also pro-life. Sharia is also pro-marriage, pro-traditional family values, pro-business, pro-trade, pro-defense. These are all Republican conservative values, which are exactly what the Sharia is talking about. So I don't think anybody connects the dots, but Islamically, religious values are aligned directly with the Republican Party platform, and though that's what Sharia is, and anybody who tells you otherwise doesn't know much about Sharia.
I think that you're absolutely right in that there seems to be certainly a conflation. When people hear the word Sharia, they definitely hear it in the context. And I say this given, just sort of what's happened with the mainstream media and the way that things are reported. People see Sharia in the context of ISIS. They see Sharia in the context of the likes of Al-Qaeda. They definitely see Sharia as something that is associated with radicals. Saba, what would you say to people that conflate that idea?
Well, Islam cannot be defined by terrorists. I think it is. I think that's what's been happening since 9/11 is that the religion has been defined by terrorism and extremists. We need to take back that narrative. The extremists have hijacked our religion. There is so much more to the religion than just the laws of war that have been misused by some extremists. There's nothing in the Quran that justifies violence. If somebody is misusing verses from the Quran to kill, they're deeply mistaken, and they're not only an enemy of Islam, but a threat to humanity. They have no place in Islam, and there's nothing. I think it's an ideological battle, even with ISIS. I think, the way to solve national security problems is to bring Muslim Americans on the table and to solve the ideology that we're dealing with. You can never win a war through the military, and so I hope that, this debate, as sad as it is, it'll create new opportunities for Muslim Americans to shine in the spotlight and provide solutions to our problems today.
Yeah, I want to go back to what you said about the war with the military, and you can't win that and go back to the referencing some of the comments made on this stage at the GOP debate, because I think that a lot of those candidates seem to think that actually opening the floodgates for more military intervention would actually solve things. It seems to refute what you're saying here as well. But I want to talk about Islamophobic views for a moment, and the notion that President Obama is a Muslim, this pervasive idea that is still not going away with Republicans. It seems to square with much of the Republican Party, because according to a Gallup poll from June, just 45% of Republicans say they could vote for a Muslim. And recent polls have found that 43 to 54% of GOP voters believe that the President Obama, is a Muslim. Harris, why do you think that conservative America continues to hold these views?
Well, it's this issue that really stems from the polarization that we've seen growing in the United States, unfortunately. And part of it is likely due to the fact that we have a two-party system that's choking this country. But what we've seen as a growing trend, a disturbing trend over the past few elections, is that you simply can't disagree with someone on matters of policy. You have to vilify them. And I valued Mr. McCain, even though he didn't win the election, but he at least made an effort to be strong, but not to overtly attack someone's character or personality. But we see that these days of calling the existing president as the worst leader to ever be in the position of a president, or trying to subjugate America under the dominion of Islam, or a socialist, and it's part of this lower human nature. And so far, it's become this trend now that in the United States, there's a large swath of the American population that defines what it means to be an American as the polar opposite of the Muslim. So that's the worst thing you could call someone. It's the same thing we did with the Japanese in this country, we did with the Black Americans in this country, and now we're doing with Muslims in this country, is to polarize them. And that's what we're seeing happening with the president.
Yeah, I mean, Saba, do you find it uncomfortable or upsetting, given that you are a Republican and also a Muslim, that those stats seem to show that a large percentage of Republican-identified voters seem to have an issue, not only with Muslims, but also seem to think that President Obama is a Muslim? By the way, not that that should matter, but this is the view that they hold.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's absurd. I mean, it just goes to the point, if they don't want a Muslim in the office, I mean, he's already a son of a Muslim at least. So, why is that such a big deal? Even if he was a Muslim, I don't see what the big deal is. Every religion has the right to hold public office. I mean, if they are a good candidate and they win the election, they have every right of being a president. I mean, Republicans, like I said, they don't know much about Islam, so they tend to, just associate it with terrorism. And if they actually knew about the Sharia and if they knew about Islamic values, they're just like Judeo-Christian values that, they follow. So it's not, I think we need to connect the dots. And, regardless of the faith, I think President Obama or, any other Muslim candidate, if there was a good comment yesterday that said 50 years ago a black president was not imaginable. And so 50 years from now, there could be a Muslim president in the U.S. Who knows? There are things that, this country, that's the beauty of the United States, is that anyone who works hard and goes for their dreams can achieve anything that's possible. So
yeah, I mean, I've got a comment here coming in. This is from iSapien, who says, Muslims, Mexicans, blacks, at what point do we formally concede that the Republican Party of 2015 is a hate group? Saba, what do you think about that?
Well, I don't want to say all, there are good and bad people. I find my involvement within the Republican Party is so essential. I learned so much, and I think, people who may be uncomfortable learn a lot about Islam and Muslims. I think just like with any other groups that we tend to get involved with, I have a good time here in Washington, D.C. I'm involved in various, D.C. GOP, in the Women's Federal, the women Republicans, and I'm on the NRCC board. There are a lot of Republican groups that I do get involved with that I think they value my presence, and just being there is so much enough, because I'm usually the only Muslim in those circles, and I wish there was other Muslims, but a lot of us are scared, and they don't know what to expect, and sometimes I do face challenges as well with certain Republicans. But
what kind of challenges, Saba?
I mean, it's been a challenging experience. Like last year, I was, I've thrown in the spotlight because, I was attacked by Bridget Gabriel through her comments about Muslims and stuff. And so conservatives have this view of somehow all Muslims are bad, and then when a Muslim shows up, they have to be a suspect. They can't possibly be a good person unless, proven innocent, and I don't know how anybody can do that. So, I mean, they have their own ignorant worldview, and the only way to break stereotypes is when you show up, you work hard, you do your best, and you just, prove them wrong. And that's what I am doing here in Washington, D.C., and I hope, others will, be more get involved in the Republican Party, because we need Muslim Americans on all sides of the debate. We need, especially within the Republican Party, because of our Islamic values, they align with the Republican Party platform. If Republicans want to have the slightest chance of winning back the White House, they have to tone down on this hatred and bigotry, because Democrats are obviously very welcoming and they're very, very supportive. And so, Republicans need to strategically reach out to Muslim Americans in key electoral states, and in all, they should visit mosques just like they go to evangelical churches all around the country. I think, we have a huge role to play in the upcoming election.
David, I want to bring you in back because, let's talk a little bit about what Saba just raised, this idea that, in terms of political platform, that the viewpoints that some Muslims hold, particularly on conservative values, actually should align with some of the Republican points and platforms. Why do you think, then, that there have been so many missteps with the GOP and Muslims?
I mean, I think it's probably because they got more traction by demonizing Muslims than by welcoming them. And, that's a choice, right? I mean, you can easily imagine a different choice. And, we should say, that's not entirely unique, right? I mean, there are many minority groups in the United States that have social values that are fairly conservative, but vote in lockstep with the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of this alignment as well with views and the way that then certain Republican presidential candidates have gone out of their way to actually seem to put their foot in their mouth with people that should be actually on board with their views and their positions. I mean, let's talk about Mexican Americans and Catholics. Talk to me about that, David, and what Trump has been saying.
No, I mean, Trump said Mexican is sending their rapists across the border. We've seen, and he sort of doubled down on those comments. I mean, we haven't, to be clear, we haven't really seen other Republican candidates say anything like that. And also to be clear, we've also seen many Republicans that have, criticized Carson and criticized Trump and distanced themselves from those views. And so, I don't know, to be frank, if what Trump and Carson say and Ted Cruz when he defends them, if they're actually going to have an effect on the GOP down the road. They really don't seem to in many ways so far. I mean, just those comments alone don't seem to really think that people don't assume that Jeb Bush shares those views or, Marco Rubio or someone else.
Yeah, I mean, there have been people obviously that have come out to try and criticize Ben Carson's comments, Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz being just a couple. And of course, Carly Fiorina, she did so last night on The Tonight Show. Take a listen.
Ben Carson's in a lot of trouble now because he's saying that he would not advocate a Muslim being president.
Well, I think that's wrong. It says in our Constitution that religion cannot be a test for office. It is also true that this country was founded on the principle that we judge each individual and that anyone of any faith is welcome here. I actually believe that people of faith make better leaders, whether it's a person of Christian faith or Jewish faith or Muslim faith or other faiths. I think faith gives us humility and empathy and optimism, and I think those are important things.
So you would be fine with that?
Yes, I would be fine with that.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think, David, about that response? Do you think that that is the right response to actually engage with this, or do you think that those that are staying silent are actually doing well to stay out of this and not align themselves with it?
I think Fiorina was pitch perfect there. I mean, I think that was from the script of how Republicans should handle this. I'm sort of surprised that more people didn't jump out to denounce Carson and Trump. There's a big opening and a big opportunity and a chance for leadership, as Tara said, and one that was missed by some.
Yeah, Harris, what do you think?
To his point, yeah, I think that we've seen some. I think even Mark Rubio had come out and said that it's time to stop wasting time on petty things like this. And I think he even said Obama's a Christian. He's an American. He was born in America. He's a Christian. Let's move on. I think that's ultimately what we should judge a presidential candidate by, is not his faith or her faith. It's about, do they have moral integrity? Are they fair and just in their dealings? Do they have good ideas for how to build relationships overseas? Can they help make jobs in this country? Can they make us ultimately safer and more stable? That's what a president is meant to do. Do you really care what this person does on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, which building they go into to worship God, or if they don't go into a building? That ultimately doesn't matter.
Yeah, although I think atheists alongside Muslims are probably the two least likely, at the moment anyway, to be voted in, certainly by some of the Republicans, given the responses we've seen from those Gallup polls. But Sab, I want to go back to what you said. I mean, you were talking about this idea of a lack of military engagement, particularly in parts of the world where there are a lot of Muslims that live, and also obviously going through a lot of discord at the moment in certain parts of the Middle East and, of course, in the Arab world as well. What did you make of some of the candidates last week on the stage at the CNN debate, particularly Carly Fiorina, who there, as David said, was pitch perfect on that response? What did you make of the way that she was talking about upping military engagement in certain situations?
I think, the way President Obama handled the situation in Iraq by pulling out all troops was not very advised decision on his part. It created a power vacuum, and that's what brought up ISIS. I think, some sort of a military engagement continued on a continued basis on countries that we have been involved with, it would serve us well. I mean, right now, the refugee crisis that we've created in Iraq and Syria, and the persecution of Christians and minorities all over, I think the way when we had our military presence there, that was not happening. And so, and similarly in Afghanistan and stuff, like the countries that we've engaged in, it would create huge power vacuums for terrorism if we don't keep some sort of leadership role in those areas.
And when you're talking about a leadership role in certain areas, I have to ask the question.
Which involves military, yeah, which has to have a military component, or defense and police security. Like, every country wants a safe, stable environment, and by pulling out all sort of defense, I think right now the way Iraq-Mosul fell, it's been detrimental to our. And that's where, we can have policy disagreements, but in terms of, I think, we will never be able to solve all ideological wars through just the military, and we definitely need to engage on the ideological component as well. But I think that's another aspect that needs to be there.
Yeah, and another conversation we'll have to have on HuffPost Live another time. I have to ask, Sabra, at the moment, if either Ben Carson or Donald Trump were to actually be on the Republican ticket, would you be able to, in all good conscience, vote for them?
I couldn't support Carson, no, not after his comments. Trump, I think he's bringing a lot of energy to the Republican Party, which it's going to be interesting watching how, but I don't think he will get the nomination. And we have a year to go. I was at the RNC first presidential debate in Cleveland last month, and it was amazing just to see all the different candidates. I mean, Carly wasn't even on the stage, and now she's in second in terms of the polling. So I'm sure we still have one full year to go, and I think that it's going to be a while. I have no doubt that Carson or Trump will never win the Republican nomination.
And you had that right from the mouth of a Republican voter and lobbyist. All right, well, David, what do you make of this? I mean, do you think that, obviously, you and I have talked about this before on Top Stories and HuffPost Live, people were saying the bubble was going to burst. It seems that it doesn't make a difference which group Donald Trump offends. He still seems to be capturing the Republican base. What do you think?
Well, I think Sab is absolutely right. I mean, I just think we won't see a Carson or Trump as the nominee, and no matter what polls say, you can just disregard them for, months to come. I just think the Republicans ultimately will get serious and reject, both of those candidates now, and neither of them have the infrastructure in place to carry this thing, to the convention. I mean, the question then becomes, what kind of damage do they do to the party? And it seems to me that the damage is actually really real in many ways. In just the way, if you have serious candidates on the record who are hedging about whether or not to defend Carson and Trump in these comments. I mean, how do you walk that back when you're facing Hillary Clinton? We've already seen two really serious candidates, Scott Walker and Rick Perry, who were governors, successful governors of big states who had to drop out because they couldn't get any oxygen with the likes of Donald Trump in the race.
Yeah, Harris, I have to ask, do you think that this has been a seriously damaging moment for the Republican Party when it comes to how Muslims in America view it?
I do indeed. I mean, the fact that the people that are perpetrating these actions and saying these words are causing Republicans like Sabah to say that they would never vote for them. That indicates that you're not strengthening the base, you're not strengthening your party, you're weakening it. And I don't find that the current state of the Republican Party is the same Republican Party during the life of Ronald Reagan. So it's definitely taken a turn in a different direction. And now with the establishment of a further right-wing political group, it almost seems like there's a desire to push these two sides further apart. And so I'm concerned about where this is going to lead the United States of America into a divided States of America.
And on that point of unity, I want to play a video here that we just received from Jonathan Greenblatt. He is the National Director of the Anti-Defamation League. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Greenblatt. I'm the National Director of the Anti-Defamation League, a 100-year-old civil rights organization dedicated to fighting anti-Semitism and bigotry. We are deeply troubled by the comments of some of the GOP presidential hopefuls about who is fit to run for office. The idea that an American Muslim could not be president of the United States is offensive, it's unconstitutional, and it's flat out wrong. Whether you're a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew or a Buddhist or a Mormon, there is no and never should be a religious litmus test.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that, this idea of a litmus test and maybe even the need for a greater interfaith dialogue. Sabah, as somebody who is within the confines and the workings of the Republican Party, do you think that it needs to have more of an emphasis on interfaith dialogue, that would actually be a benefit to the party as a whole?
Yes, definitely. I just emailed the Republican Faith Outreach Director at the RNC this morning, and it was interesting. Last month at the RNC first presidential debate, we had a meeting of all faith leaders, and I was the only Muslim there, and I was surprised that there is no other Republican leaders, Muslim or Jewish. I mean, all I saw was mostly Christian evangelical pastors and priests, and I wish that, the faith outreach component of the RNC has to go out to other faith groups. And I know that Chad Conley at the RNC, he's the faith outreach director for strategic partnerships. I know he will be definitely looking into it, and I know they're working hard and will be looking into interfaith components because they need all the Christian, Muslim, all the faith votes they can get.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone's going to be needing all the votes they can get, so that it's not too close to call when it comes to election time. I've got a comment here from Dafiz, who just really reinforcing what both Sabah and Harris said. Sharia means the laws of the land. That can include the Constitution. This is some basic understanding, but Harris, do you think that more people, Republicans and non-Republicans, actually need to have a better understanding of Islam?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And we follow the guidance of the international leader of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, the Khalifa of Islam, His Holiness Mirza Masroor Ahmad, who has constantly told us that we have to be able to reach on the other side of the aisle and understand the other. And so that's where the interfaith dialogue comes into play, but also what our clear vision is, which is that religion should not legislate in the domain of humans' relationship to God. The law of one's homeland has predominance over all other laws, and true Sharia is conducive to a system of your personal life, or if you want to bring it into government, but it's only it could influence your morals, and that should introduce a statement of government that is beneficent, ensures universal human rights, protects minorities, and dispenses absolute justice for all people. That's the only thing that our scripture calls us toward. It doesn't call us to legislate religion in the domain of law.
Well, I want to end just with a couple of tweets from Senator Harry Reid, who tweeted this out yesterday. I think it's extremely poignant. Kareem Khan sacrificed everything for his country. Shame on Carson for denigrating him and all Muslim Americans. And you can see there a Bronze Star, a Purple Heart for Operation Iraqi Freedom. And he finished by saying, I call on every Republican to denounce Ben Carson's disgusting remarks that shameful intolerance and bigotry should have no place here. I want to thank you all very much for joining me today. Harris, Saba, and David, thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
And guys, stick around. Up next on HuffPost Live, I'm going to be talking to people about Periscope.